Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast. Join Corbin and Allen, along with guest hosts, as they bring their love for the cinema to discuss films from every genre and decade. Learn about the history of the film, little-known facts, and insightful explorations while they enjoy discussing your favorite film. The curtain is rising and your podcast is starting, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your guide to the silver screen. Welcome back, listeners, to the 13th installment in our M. Night Shyamalan movie review series. Today we are reviewing Glass. This is your co-host Corbin.
And I'm Allen, and it's been quite the interesting journey getting here to Glass, which as of this recording is the most recent Shyamalan movie that has been released.
That's absolutely right. It came out January 18th, 2019, which is weird to think it came out this year because that feels so long ago. It feels like it came out at the very least last year.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't think when we were introducing this movie and get ready for us to record it, now this was back before we had to reschedule things, I was like, man, I didn't realize that Glass was had already come out at this point, because I feel like it had come out like a long time ago for me. I didn't realize how soon that we would be getting not only a new Shyamalan movie, but then we'd also be reviewing that.
And of course, it is the third and seemingly final installment in the Unbreakable trilogy, if you will, which started all the way back with Unbreakable in the very early 2000s. And Surprise Split, which came out 2 years ago, was a secret sequel. And now this is supposedly capstoning the trilogy. We'll talk about that, whether we think this is the final installment, the final one. But if you haven't seen Unbreakable, I would say then some things in this movie probably won't make complete sense to you. And if you haven't seen Split as well, then there are things that won't make sense as well. And of course, we have reviewed Unbreakable and Split, so go ahead and check out our reviews for both of those films. And of course, this being the 13th installment, we have reviewed all of Shyamalan's previous films, even dating back to his very first student film, Praying with Anger, and his interesting look at a little Catholic schoolboy and the loss of his grandfather in Wide Awake. And I also did review Stuart Little. Shyamalan wrote the film. That's a written review.
Right.
All of that is linked in the description below. And while you're at it, go ahead and check out all of the links to our Facebook page, our YouTube page, Twitter page. All of those links are very easy to find. Our official website, where we have great written reviews and also different insightful articles and guides as well. And of course, Shyamalan wrote this film. Not only did he direct it.
Right, and that makes sense, because not only is this a trilogy of movies now that we have here, and I'm pretty sure he wrote both Unbreakable and Split all by himself. And now we did note last time that Split, I believe we mentioned this last time, but Split had already kind of been written around the time that Unbreakable had been released. There were scenes, the character of Kevin Wendell Crumb was going to be in Unbreakable, but the man, Shyamalan himself, decided to pull him out for balancing issues, but kept a lot of those scenes. So when he wrote Split, he already had a good chunk of it written for him. He just had to more or less just finish it up and make it a full-length movie. So when that happened, when he actually wrote out and finished Split, he put in that ending with Bruce Willis and didn't really know exactly if it would actually become a sequel until I think about a month after Split released in the theaters. That's when he got confirmation from both Disney and then also from Universal that they would be fine using the character of David Dunn from Unbreakable in a movie with that's universally owned with Split and its character of Kevin Wendell Crumb. So he actually wrote that ending and didn't actually know if there was going to be a sequel or not, although from that time it sounded like it would probably happen because he was on pretty good terms with Walt Disney, because they did let him use David Dunn as a character at the end anyways. So at the time, it's kind of funny to think that at the time there was no confirmation that there would be a sequel that would use both the characters from both movies, but when he finished writing the movie Split.
It's a little weird to think that Shyamalan, who is the creative mind behind all of these characters and story, doesn't own the characters. The companies that distributed the films own the rights to these characters. And that's something I don't think we think about very often. We just think, oh, it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie. You can just do whatever you want with a sequel. It's like, well, no, there's a little bit more contractually involved and legally involved when you're making movies across different studios.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Marvel has had this kind of a thing for a long time. I think since really, especially since the beginning of the MCU. Yep. Notably, the X-Men have not been in any kind of Marvel Cinematic Universe movie up until about now. I think they're starting to integrate them into it because now Disney owns Fox, who owns the X-Men, right? So we don't often think that, you know, characters are under copyright for a certain company all the time. It's usually, maybe you think, oh, they're part of this director, but might not even be the case. So yeah, it is kind of interesting to think that, especially in Shyamalan's case, where some people may not even know that he jumped around for studios because they may not even track that kind of a thing, to think that it would be a bigger deal to have the character of Unbreakable and Split from two different studios be together in the same movie.
And usually studios won't lend out their characters unless they know it's going to be a profitable deal for them both ways. Right. And more recently, we saw this between Sony and Marvel concerning Spider-Man. So was this a profitable decision?
Well, we had a budget of $20 million, which is a little bit interesting to me because this is a Blumhouse production, and typically Blumhouse productions don't get this big a budget ever. We like last week with Split, we saw a $5 to $9 million budget, but this week is $20 million, which is significantly bigger. But it is under Universal, and is under the Buena Vista International label, which is owned by Walt Disney. So I guess I can see that. Opening weekend, $40 million, which we did note a few times that usually you want to double or at least make back your budget opening weekend and hopefully double it by the end of your theatrical run at least. And it doubled its budget opening weekend, which to be fair isn't even really that big of a budget considering a lot of other movies. So when it was all said and done, domestically, $111 million, foreign $134.3 to $135.9 million, with a worldwide total of $245.3 million to $247 million. So that's some really good money considering the budget that we have.
This seems to be Shyamalan's stride, is having an opening weekend of $40 million. That was exactly how much money he made last time with Split. So it seems to be expected now Shyamalan will hit that sweet spot of 40 million. As long as he keeps his budgets low like this, then that's very profitable for him. And then these domestic, foreign, and worldwide numbers aren't surprising because they're pretty much on track for the most part with last time. And Shyamalan seems to be hitting around that quarter of a billion mark worldwide with each of his previous films. So these aren't blockbuster numbers by any stretch of the imagination, but for a $20 million budget, and especially for Shyamalan, you can see he's progressively maintaining a very profitable track record, and which makes him more of a safe bet for producers and studios to work with him in the future.
Exactly. And even when it was released in the theater, it was number one for the first 3 weeks of its run, which is the exact same picture as what we saw last week with Split. It was number one for the first 3 weeks. So when it came out, it was up against The Upside, which had already been for 2 weeks, Aquaman, which had been in for 5 weeks, Dragon Ball Super Broly, which is on its first week, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was in for its 6th week. So it came out with not much competition.
No, and this is so smart because we knew how Split was a good film that worked out, and it came out, I believe it also came out in January. And then 2 years later, Glass comes out in January, and usually January is the garbage month. But if you know your film is going to be good and profitable, put it in January because it'll make a lot more money that way because it doesn't have that steep of competition.
Right. And even in the next week, it still stayed number one. And it's the same movies before: Glass, The Upside, Aquaman, but a new movie called The Kid Who Would Be, what is that? The Kid Who Would Be King, it looks like.
Yeah.
Which I haven't heard of until just now.
Oh.
That came out that week. And then the week after that, Looks like Miss Bala came out, but came out number 3. So number 1 for Glass. So it wasn't until its 4th week in the theater when it dropped down to number 5. But that's also because Lego Movie 2 came out. What Men Want, and Cold Pursuit were all in their first week. So it did really well in its theatrical run, which is surprising. But not too surprising given how Split did also very well in the box office.
I guarantee if this would have came out during the summer, like all of his previous films were, like, a few years back, it would have been crushed. I think it would have done better than some of his other movies, but it would not have done this well. And the other thing that I noticed is James Newton Howard is not back doing the score.
That's right. Yeah, the same composer as last time, Wes Dillon Thornton, who did the score for Split, is back again for this score with Glass, which is interesting because he is going to incorporate a lot of the themes used in Unbreakable with the score that he made with Split. There's a lot of tracks in there where they use both at the same time, the tracks from Split and the tracks from Unbreakable.
Yeah, there's kind of this main theme where I basically just call it like keeping time, where it's most notably heard towards the climax at the end. We won't give that away. That doesn't sound like anything James Newton Howard would compose. I do really like that, but that does seem to be more of a trend lately. Is particularly I'm thinking of Dunkirk, where that didn't. I guess that brings up a whole another debate about what is a film score. But it's like almost like these like soundscapes, or this one was just like a repetitious sound, essentially.
Right. Yeah, there is a notable difference with how James Newton Howard scores a movie and how this new composer that we're seeing now, Wes Dillon Thornton, scores a movie. There's a very big difference between the two of them. I did listen to the score in its entirety preparing for this review. And my thoughts on the score are actually surprisingly positive, because last week there wasn't a lot of score to Split. There was some there, but not like a traditional theatrical score. Whereas this one feels more of that typical theatrical score where they have a lot of themes incorporated into it. So this time around, I surprisingly was shocked by how much I actually ended up liking the score for Glass. Now, I'm not going to say it's anything that I would put above what James Newton Howard has done, but I do think it is a very solid score overall.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also say I do really like the look of this film. The director of photography is Mike Giolakis, who is kind of an up-and-coming guy who's done stuff with horror before. I noticed he was the cinematographer for It Follows, and also this year he did it with Jordan Peele. That's kind of a big win for him. He's worked with Shyamalan and Peele. And the guy who did It Follows, he came out with a movie recently. I don't even remember what it was. I want to say The Nightingale, but don't quote me on that. I think the film looks pretty good. What did you think of the film?
When you compare it to Split, I think Split does look cinematography-wise much better. I think the way that it frames a lot of its subjects, I think, does a better job. But I won't say this movie looks bad, because I don't think it looks bad. I think it does look good, but I do think that Split still has the upper hand in terms of visuals here. But that's to say, it's not bad. I just feel Split does a much better job.
But when the movie came out, did critics and audiences like it? That's kind of the question.
So it's kind of hard to say. Let me just give you the scores and we'll talk about it here. So IMDb at a 6.7, which is a little bit lower from last week. Not super low, but it's definitely lower because, I mean, we noticed that Split had like a 7.2, I believe, in IMDb.
Yeah, 7.3.
Yes. But yeah, 6.7, kind of low. Metacritic at a 43, which is E.
It's very average. It's actually Metacritic says it's average, but it's nearly close to unfavorable, because I think unfavorable is like a 39.
Yeah.
So it's very close to being in the red.
Right. Rotten Tomatoes critic score of 37% and an audience score of 69%. So audiences didn't tend to like it a bit more than critics do, but critics were not happy about it at 37%. It's pretty not good. And then Letterboxd 3.0, which is above average, not by a lot, but it is above average for Letterboxd. And so it sounds like, and what I'm seeing here, audiences, and Cinema Score has a B.
Yeah.
Which is about what Shyamalan tends to get nowadays with his movies. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like audiences liked it and critics were not happy about it.
It does seem that way. It seems that audiences liked it, but it wasn't an overwhelming like for the film, not like Split got. Audiences,
right?
I would dare say audiences loved Split with a 7.3, a 79% approval on Rotten Tomatoes. And audiences did give Split a B+, very close to an A-. So you can see that critics really found this movie to be very lacking, very poor, but audiences thought it was fine. It was okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there does seem to be a rather positive reaction from the audience compared to critics. So yeah, that overall, the scores for this movie, when you look at it from both sides, kind of comes right down the middle. Glass seems to be, from both sides, when you average it out, about average when you compare them. So it's interesting because, last week, Split got very positive reactions, and this week, they've dipped. They've gone back down to just okay, which is interesting to me because I know we just came out of this what we call the Shyamalan Valley of the Shadow of Death, because Shyamalan did a few pretty bad movies for a while, and we thought after The Visit and after Split that we were walking out of this, but now it's kind of hard to say with Glass. I guess we won't know until the next couple of movies come out if we are out of the valley per se. But scores for Glass are looking not what I was expecting. I was expecting them to be a lot higher, but they're not, which is surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shocking drop from a 77%, which I believe was, 77% certified fresh critic rating from Rotten Tomatoes, and it drops down to a measly 37% from critics and 62 Metascore to 43 Metascore. So, absolutely, critics, this is a sharp drop critically, where an audiences still thought it was okay. And it's interesting because Split has a higher approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes than Unbreakable by 7%.
Interesting. I actually didn't really realize that.
Yeah, Unbreakable was 70%, whereas Split is a 77%. So let that soak in, listeners, as we approach our review, that audiences thought it was like good, but definitely not great.
Yes.
And critics thought it was bad.
Right. Yeah, critics were not very happy with this one, it looks like.
Well, listeners, if you haven't seen Glass and you don't want the movie spoiled for you, go ahead and click pause right now. Go ahead and check out the film. Come back and click play, and we'll be ready to talk about it.
19 years have passed since the events of Unbreakable, and David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, has become known as the Overseer, a vigilante who protects the streets of Philadelphia by the aid of his son, Joseph, who is reprised by Spencer Treat Clark from Unbreakable. They get word that there is a killer on the loose who tends to target young girls, which happens to be Kevin, played by James McAvoy, from Split, who has been roaming the streets since the events of Split. David and Kevin, also known as the Beast, meet when David finds 4 cheerleaders chained to a table in an abandoned warehouse. They both realize that neither can kill the other, but are caught by Dr. Staple, played by Sarah Paulson. Dr. Staple has caught not just David and Kevin, but also Elijah, reprised by Samuel L. Jackson. The doctor says that she is trying to help the 3 of them get over their delusions that superheroes are real. She tries to give them a reasonable explanation to the things that they see as superhuman. That night, however, Elijah breaks out of his room and approaches Kevin and tells him he'll break everyone out of here tomorrow. However, the next morning, Elijah is brought in for a lobotomy after being caught leaving his room. But Elijah had outsmarted the doctors and had sabotaged the machine that would give him the lobotomy. And so what they thought was a successful surgery ended up not doing anything at all. So after his lobotomy, he ends up killing a nurse and ends up escaping again. And he also breaks out Kevin / the Beast and plays with David, telling him that they are going to Osaka Tower, the tallest building in Philadelphia, where he'll show the world that superheroes exist, and expects David to come after them, once again to hopefully reiterate his plan of showing the world that superheroes exist. Elijah's mom, Mrs. Price, reprised by Carolyn Woodard, Casey, reprised by Anya Taylor-Joy, and Joseph all arrive at the hospital at the same time the three break out. David and the Beast fight once again, but like before, they are evenly matched. Joseph convinces the Beast that his father did not leave him, but he was on the same train that David was on, the one that crashed. This causes the Beast to turn on Elijah, flipping him out of his wheelchair, mortally wounding him. But Elijah counterpoints him, saying that if it weren't for him, the Beast would never have existed. The Beast then turns against David and starts attacking David, throwing him into a tank of water, which we know is his weakness from Unbreakable. David breaks out of the tank, and the Beast begins to run before he being stopped by Casey, who brings Kevin forward. However, in a turn of events, Dr. Staple's intentions were different than what we were led to believe. A sniper shoots Kevin, while another armed guard drowns David in a puddle. Dr. Staple explains to David the reason why all this is happening. She's a part of a secret organization whose job it is to remove those with superhuman powers from the world because it is unfair for them to hold such power. David, Kevin, and Elijah all die in the parking lot as Dr. Staple has the security cam footage erased. Or so they thought. Elijah was one step ahead of her once again and had streamed the entire parking lot event to a private network. He never planned on attacking the tower. Casey, Joseph, and Mrs. Price upload the footage to prove to the world that superhumans do exist as credits roll. But not before Mark Wahlberg and Paul Giamatti cross the screen, bringing the whole thing together. Not it really, but it sounds like that's almost where it could go at the end of this.
Okay, when you said that, I thought I fast forwarded through the credits and I thought, wait a minute, did Alan see something that I didn't? But yeah, you're right. I'm kind of waiting for the Shyamalan verse to occur.
Yep.
Because there are bits and pieces throughout his movies where I'm like, if he wanted to, he could easily probably tie all of them together in some way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and then the last shot where it's in I think it's the Philadelphia Union Station. The happening was shot in this location. Oh. This is where one of the scenes take place. So that's where I got the idea. Was what if Mark Wahlberg just walked across the screen? Because it was like the last shot is like a zoom out of the whole area. So I was wondering, I was waiting for it to happen almost. I was waiting for Mark Wahlberg just walk across the screen to bring everything together. That never happened, of course.
I wish Wahlberg just popped up and looked at the screen and just said, "It's happening." And
that'd be great.
And that would actually, I think people would have even liked the movie even more.
That would be great.
Because Shyamalan would totally be poking fun at himself. But alas, nothing of the kind happens. Right. But the one thing that I do think Shyamalan achieves probably best of all with this movie is I think he does make this feel like a true sequel, not only to Split, but also to Unbreakable. Which is I would say it's probably very difficult to achieve that, considering this came out like at least 17 years. It's almost been 2 decades since Unbreakable came out, I believe. Right. Maybe it has been 2 decades. I can't quite recall. But nevertheless, making it feel like this really does connect is very hard. The only other movie that I can think of that's really done that well is Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049, which we haven't brought that up in a while, so I felt like we probably should bring that up. But that is another example of bridging 2 films together that were done decades apart.
Right. Yeah, it is surprising that, and it seems interesting too at the end of Split when we see that ending and David Dunn is now being brought into this universe in some kind of a way. It seemed kind of strange, but at the same time, somewhat fitting for David Dunn to be in that movie, because the Unbreakable is about, a man who literally can't break a bone, or really even get sick. And then you also have the Beast who can transform and change his physiology to be somewhat of that same kind of a thing, where he is super strong and he is as tough as nails, almost as much as David is. So it seems kind of odd, but yet fitting for David Dunn to show up at the end of Split, and then also have a movie where these two do face off, and you get to see what exactly happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object in this film. I do wish they did it more often, and we'll kind of get into that a bit later, but it is kind of interesting to see these two characters who Shyamalan has made up and has written, surprisingly enough, for the same movie, but they end up being split into two, then write them into the same movie finally after so many years. It has, I think it had been 19 years roughly in real time since Unbreakable came out to when Split shows.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the film is called Glass because Unbreakable mainly focused on David, Split mainly focused on Kevin, the Beast, whatever you want to call him. And this film is supposed to be focusing on Mr. Glass, Samuel L. Jackson's character. But the movie starts off with reintroducing us briefly to Kevin, to James McAvoy's character.
Right.
And then we jump into Bruce Willis's character, and I thought it was really cool. They brought back his son, Spencer Treat Clark, who, as far as I can tell, really hasn't done much acting, hasn't been in the limelight since his big role in Unbreakable. So it's really cool to see the father and son team back up. I don't know why Robin Wright didn't come back to reprise her role. I understand in the film they wrote her out as passing away from leukemia.
Right.
Technically, her character is in a flashback, but that's not her.
Right.
That's just some lady standing in for her. Nevertheless, we do get time between David and Kevin, and I like all of that. And then we think Mr. Glass has gone into a catatonic state for some reason. We have no reason to know why he would until I checked the time, a little over an hour into the movie. Does Mr. Glass really become operational and speak for the first time, which is a really surprising, and I would say that's a pretty gutsy move to do that to your title character.
Oh, yeah, and especially an actor whose name is Samuel L. Jackson, not to give him a speaking line until an hour into your movie, which is about halfway, because this movie, I think, is about 2 hours, 10 minutes, which I think is the longest Shyamalan movie that we have.
Yeah, it's the longest.
Yeah, so it's surprising to me that, and now it makes sense in how the movie plays out, but it is surprising to me that probably one of the biggest actors in Hollywood today, Samuel L. Jackson, doesn't get a line until, way into almost halfway through the movie. That is surprising to me.
The other thing that struck me as funny, and I didn't even put it together, is how at least two of these actors are big parts of other superhero franchises. Samuel L. Jackson plays Nick Fury in all of the Marvel movies, and James McAvoy is Professor X in the X-Men films. And I think that's to his testament how fantastic of a job he does really transforming himself in this role. He's bald in both performances, but in this one, he is this visceral, muscular, very rageful, scary man that you don't want to get in the way of. Whereas in X-Men, he is a quiet, contemplative British, guy that uses his mind. Very opposite roles. But there was a special feature where James McAvoy was talking with M. Night Shyamalan about how he's been a part of the superhero franchise before, but he likes that Shyamalan is taking a totally different approach than really what the Marvel and DC films are doing.
Right. And then also, speaking of that different approach, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think I like the ending. Not necessarily in the fact that everyone dies, but kind of. I mean that in the way that what I'm trying to say is that I like the way that Shyamalan writes the ending because he subverts our expectations by killing off the three main characters. He kills off the three characters that have been built up to this movie, which is a very surprising way to go about it because he does bring up a lot of, comic book and superhero cliches in this movie, but then at the end kind of subverts that and instead of everyone surviving in the end, being able to move on with their lives, like what happens in Marvel all the time, they die. They end up dying for the thing that they were trying, or these two, they end up dying in the end, which is surprising to me that Shyamalan would even go that direction because we know that Unbreakable, at least up until this point, has been a pretty beloved and kind of cult classic movie. So it's surprising to take that, bring it back, and then just immediately stop it right there at the end. It's a pretty bold move, I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold move, but one that absolutely makes sense because Shyamalan has grounded this franchise in realism while at the same time bringing in these quasi supernatural elements with David, who can bench press a lot, and the Beast, who can supposedly stop bullets. But the thing that I do like is there's always these explanations as to why they're not that spectacular. Like they said, the reason the bullets didn't go through is because the shells were really old, and the bars were really brittle, so they were able to bend them more easily that way. So I think he does a good job of subverting our expectations throughout the whole movie as to these people really aren't superheroes. They're just super insane and give themselves these delusions of grandeur. But since you did bring up the end, I liked that everyone died in the end, because honestly, that's the realistic approach.
Right.
Like, I mean, when you see all this stuff and people are falling from great heights in all these other movies, all these people should be dead. Or when they get shot or ejected into space, or just these fantastical things happen, sorry, they're dead. But no, because it's a superhero movie, they're not. But I did like that they all died. The one thing that I really didn't like was I felt David's death to be incredibly anticlimactic by being drowned in, like, I don't know, 5 inches of water in a pothole.
Right.
And his son they allow his son to run up to him right after he's been drowned. I don't know. That really didn't work for me. I was really shocked about that. That felt anticlimactic.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if we're wanting to get into criticisms quite yet, but I think one of my main issues with this movie is how kind of anticlimactic it ended up being. Even though I did like the ending and how it does finish up, I think because Shyamalan tries to ground this in realism, he also opens the door to it being anticlimactic, because he doesn't really want to go too far beyond supernatural and like into what would be, I guess, considered the cliche superhero movie, right? But he's also trying to keep it grounded. But what he's trying to do at the same time is, I think, because he's trying to keep it grounded and doesn't want to make it, the cliche superhero movie, I think he kind of accidentally and inadvertently makes it anticlimactic. Because even though the ending does happen all in a parking lot, I didn't feel like this was the final battle that these 3 characters could have, and then make it justified for them to die in the end. I feel like there need to be something, a bit more personal than what we end up having here.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. But before I talk more about that, like 2 other compliments that I have is I did find all of the performances to be good all around, including this new lady, their new doctor. I liked her role of trying to break them down mentally and trick them. And I really did actually like the retcon of Kevin's dad being on the train just a few rows down from David Dunn, and then Mr. Glass saying, can't you see, like, the hero and villain are born from the same circumstances, from the same situation, but they each go in different directions. And I really did love Mr. Glass's very puppet master role there at the end, where he is kind of this meta narrator, where he's saying, yes, the classic turn where where the villain begins to side with the good guy. And even his mom is like, I thought you weren't supposed to die in limited editions. And he's like, this isn't a limited edition. This is, I can't remember what he said, but it's just kind of weird and twisted to watch him. He's basically like a 5-year-old kid who is getting to watch his toys come to life and duke it out. And he gets to see his life's passion come to fruition, even if that means he dies at the end. He doesn't really die with a complaint. Right. I really liked that. I liked all of that as well.
Yeah, it's kind of, you get this feeling not too long after he starts to play a bigger role in the story, when he starts talking and stuff, that he has a lot more control over what's happening than what we're being shown. Like we know that he can break out of his cell, no problem, right? He does that, I think, 2 or 3 times. So what's interesting to me is that we do know that he has almost as if he has full control over these 2 characters, but is waiting for the right opportunity to to manipulate them and to actually make them do what they needs to do. Because at the very end of the story, we come to find out he had control the whole time. Like he knew exactly what was going on, and that he ended up more or less doing what he said he was going to do. He was going to show the world that superheroes exist, but he didn't do it himself. He did it through what would, I guess, be considered the sidekicks of the story. He goes through them and has them be the ones who show the world that superheroes exist. I like that aspect that Mr. Glass, fittingly enough, this movie's called Glass, ends up being more of a main character than what I was expecting out of this movie, I guess. And at least what the movie was given to me to begin with, because I didn't think that he was going to play that big of a role because he just wasn't saying anything for a long time. And then, of course, that mastermind puppet master like role that he plays, and I'm more subtle than what I was even expecting that too. Ends up being a big idea there, especially in the very end. I did end up enjoying how, I guess, Mr. Glass's character was written and how he manipulates and moves the chess pieces around in the story to his own willing. We just don't know how he's going to do it. I think that's probably the bigger twist of the story of this movie is Mr. Glass and how much control he actually had.
Yeah, and Jackson and Willis, I think, do a great job stepping back into their roles that they played almost 20 years ago. And we learn at the end of Unbreakable that Mr. Glass was the puppet master the whole time as well.
Right.
Which I loved that twist at the end of that film. The other thing I liked was that I just remembered was how they introduced Casey into the story and used her as well. She is pivotal to Kevin's redemption. So I'm glad they followed up with her story arc and didn't just drop her off from Split, because they very easily could have. But I think for continuity's sake, that really helped. And David has a son, and Mr. Glass has his mom, like he always had. And then so Kevin needs somebody as well. So he has Casey, and the way she uses compassion and love and forgiveness to bring out Kevin's humanity and how Kevin holds the light all the way till the end, and that redemption, I found that to be pretty touching, and that part was very satisfying for me to see that character redeemed from a very dark past and very heinous actions.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting too that how we do get to see how the three's weaknesses are kind of pushed against them when they're in their cells. Like, we know that if they try to do anything funky and try to escape, then they'll be hit with their weakness. We know that David's weakness is water. We find out in this movie that the Beast's or Kevin's weakness is flashing lights that kind of bring out other personalities, but it comes on as a twist a little bit later that his real weakness is actually love and compassion and physical touch. And I ended up liking that because, it's interesting too, because it's Casey who's the one who brings that out. That would kind of be the last person you would expect to bring that out of this character because of what happened in Split. And then, of course, Mr. Glass, that's kind of everything. But yeah, I did end up enjoying that a little bit more than because originally I didn't know. Originally, I was thinking, okay, was that it then? Is that his weakness, just bright flashing lights to bring out other personalities? And while that's true, the real weakness, I guess, of this super villain is love and compassion, which I think that does a really good. I think Shyamalan writes it in really well and does a really good job at incorporating that into the story and having that redemption arc of the two's relationship that you maybe wouldn't have even expected there to be a redemption arc there in the first place.
My first disappointment, though, comes fairly early on in the film when David and the Beast are fighting, and I think it's a pretty good fight. I like how he rescues those girls. It's a little weird, though, I guess, that David is dubbed the Overseer, and he's going around just beating people up in their homes, beating the bad guys up, I guess, to teach them a lesson. I don't know. Anyways, but when they do go colliding out of the window together and they both fall on the ground and they're about to go at it, just this awesome, it's going to be electric when they fight. But then, surprise, the doctor is there with her flashing lights and an entire SWAT team. And I thought that's just far too happenstance for her to be right there. Maybe that's the entrance they're going to go through and they're going to goad him out and be prepared. That just felt too contrived to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I would say a lot of my criticisms or disappointments come from Dr. Staple herself, because Dr. Staple from the very beginning kind of feels like there is more to her character than what the movie is letting on, which we kind of find out at the end. Her plan was to actually get rid of these characters, like just try and remove that idea that they are superhuman from them, and then go to more extremes if she needs to. That was no surprise to me when it was revealed that she's actually the bad guy the whole time. I kind of had that idea that maybe she is the bad guy from the moment she was introduced to the story, because it seems way too happenstance for her to be in this moment right now, to capture these two characters. It just seems way too contrived for that to be even plausible. Her character, and we'll kind of maybe just talk about her a little bit later, but her character, I feel, is a bit weaker than what I guess I've seen Shyamalan do before with a lot of side characters. Typically, from what I've noted, he does a pretty good job at least making the side characters interesting to watch. Even if they aren't in a good movie like The Happening, they are still interesting characters to watch. Whereas in this movie, all the side characters kind of feel boring and kind of one-dimensional, almost all across the board. It's a very strange, I guess, movie to see Shyamalan do after every other movie that I've seen him write and cast and direct.
Well, yeah, not only the characters, but I would also say just the arc of the story. And I guess that ties into the arc of the characters in general, is I feel like we're never really progressing as they're within this asylum. Once they're institutionalized, I feel like the plot just comes to a halt, and then we're just basically buying time until we know the inevitable climax of all three of them coming together and duking it out has to take place. Which, I mean, I liked that taking place in front of the hospital, like we already mentioned, and the comic book ending is subverted. They're not going to blow up Osaka Tower. It's just going to be the real triumph comes in the footage and fighting, and how the doctor had her own downfall. But yeah, like I said, I think this is the second time I've seen the movie. I watched it twice, and upon second viewing, I know there's not much meat to the second act here, so it gets a little sleep-inducing throughout it. There's really not much to pay attention to.
Oh yeah, no. Once they get into the asylum, into the hospital, this week almost comes to a complete dead stop. It's very odd because this movie is 2 hours and 10 minutes long, yet spends almost an hour of its time doing basically nothing. It's very, very odd. The second act is easily the weakest act of the movie, which usually the second act is supposed to be not only the longest, but also the thing that builds up to the third act. So and that may be why the third act, I feel, was not as climactic as I felt it could have been, because there isn't a lot of really, I guess, intentional and meaningful setup to get to that act there at the very end of the third act, when they all meet up in the parking lot and actually duke it out for the last time. And yeah, this second act is very, very weak and surprisingly boring. I was wondering, when I got about an hour into the movie, I looked at the time and I was like, you can't be kidding me. There's an hour left of this. So it's surprising to me. And probably one of my bigger critiques too is just the second act in general. It's just really boring. Nobody goes anywhere. Nothing really happens. You could skip big portions of this movie and wouldn't be lost at all. Nothing would have really changed significantly. And you could pick up the pieces as you watch the scene after you've already fast forwarded. It's nothing that I would consider to be really worth the time being in this movie. A lot of this feels like it could just be cut out and save a lot more time and make it a bit more interesting.
Well, you may be surprised to learn that the original cut of Split, according to Shyamalan himself, was 3 hours and 20 minutes long.
Of Split?
Oh, excuse me, of Glass.
Okay, that's surprising. I can see that. I can see that considering what we have here now. I can see that 3 hours and 20 minutes, that's no surprise.
I can't even, I guess it doesn't surprise me, but I can't even imagine watching that cut of the film.
Oh yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I have no idea what he would talk about.
I have no idea. I guess I do have a bit of an idea, because on the DVD, he did include quite a lot of deleted scenes that I did watch all of them. And honestly, I can't tell you any of them, recount any of them to you, because they were rightful cuts that should be made. It was
Yeah.
all very fluffy sidetracking stuff. The only thing that I actually liked better was the alternate opening for the film. The alternate opening was showing them setting up the hospital that they would be used in, and then it would cut to Kevin and the cheerleaders. But Shyamalan was basically saying how he wanted to show how this was all going to take place in one environment and show all this really mysterious equipment being brought in, all very mysterious, and it has that keeping time music, like I mentioned. And then it would come back to that and come full circle or whatever. So the alternate opening is pretty good. The rest of the deleted scenes were rightfully cut. And then just to give you an insight into my reaction when I first saw this movie, I first watched it a little over 2 months ago. I really had that sinking feeling once they were in the hospital and it kept going there. And I thought, this is it. I'm definitely disappointed because I love Split and I think Unbreakable is a great film. And then I was slowly being let down throughout the entire film that we really weren't going anywhere. And then it really solidified for me when they made the choice to have David's exit be drowned in a couple inches of water. And I thought everybody else's exit was great. And then we can talk about, if you want, the Illuminati twist. What did you make of that whole... I call it the Illuminati twist. I don't remember what they call their society. Basically, they're the rulers of the universe. Their secret society.
Right. So I mentioned earlier that the twist that the Doctor has is not that big of a surprise to me. So when I wasn't thinking that, she's a part of the secret organization. I just kind of had an idea that her motives are not going to be as, I guess, pure as she thinks they're going to be, as the movie is leading us to believe that they are. So when it's revealed that she is a part of, the Illuminati, then I'm just like, okay, I'm confused because in some points of this movie, Shyamalan subverts our expectations by presenting what would be considered a cliche and then going the opposite direction, namely the ending when all three main characters die, right? That's probably the best example I can give where you think they're going to survive and then all of a sudden they almost all die almost pretty close to the same time. I was surprised by that. Then when we have the secret ending where this character is actually a part of a secret organization, it was like, no, wait a minute. I thought we were subverting expectations and not really going too much into the cliche. Why are we rolling into the cliche now? It just felt like the movie, especially what had been leading up to it, has been pretty original and being subverting and how we think it's going to go, but then doesn't go that direction with just the last two movies in general and the kind of leading up to this point. It was just like, okay, well then why isn't this ending with the Dr. Staple more, I guess, original than this ending that we get here where she's a part of this Illuminati gang? It seems weird and kind of dumb in my own opinion that this is the ending that Dr. Staple gets. It's no surprise again, but it's just dumb that this is the ending. This cliche, I'm a part of some bigger organization ending that she gets is actually the ending that we do have.
I guess I didn't find it to be too cliche, but what I guess I found to be more so cliche is that Shyamalan doesn't really do anything with it.
Yeah.
Aside just a twist, just to make it, just to have the Shyamalan twist is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And that's where I was really let down, is when we do get the twist, she's a part of this organization and she's been having a go with them the whole time and with us as the audience. I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes some sense. But then the real issue comes in with the final twist and the final ending where Mr. Glass had been streaming the footage the whole time and it's going to go viral. The only problem is there's not really any stakes to the outing of the Illuminati organization, right? Because they're not going to be outed. I understand she failed in her mission, but it's like, who cares? And regardless, who cares that they've been like, why do they even shut down these superheroes for 10,000 years to begin with? It's just, I find all of that to just be very underwhelming and very underused. And I would even say underdeveloped. This just seems like Shyamalan threw that at the end there. And I kept waiting and waiting for an even greater twist to come, particularly maybe David coming back and proving her wrong or something, but that wasn't there. And so watching David's son and Mr. Glass's mom and Casey, this unlikely trio, just sit in the train station and just drink their coffees, sip their lattes, and watch it pop up on the internet. That's cliche and very boring and just a total letdown.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you what's really underdeveloped. These side characters are crazy underdeveloped. Because, okay, Casey, at least Casey has had some up until this point. She was in a movie that took place no more than 3 weeks before this movie takes place. So we at least have something to her character. The problem is she does absolutely nothing for a good portion of this movie. That hour that I complain that nothing happens, she does hardly anything in. Joseph and Mrs. Price are, I think, probably the worst or the best examples of underdeveloped characters, because Joseph is brand new from Unbreakable. So a lot has changed since Unbreakable. And it's clear that he's a very different character from then. But they don't give him enough time for that connection between him and his dad to really be solidified between the two of them. And then have the ending where his dad dies to be emotionally impacting. Same with Mrs. Price, which I think is an even better example as to when her son is dying. It's almost as if she's somewhat happy about it, because it's not like she's like particularly sad about it though, but because she's talking with him and almost kind of joking with him that, oh, I thought the hero, or I thought this is supposed to happen in the comic book, how they always end. And then he's like, no, this is not a limited edition. It's almost as if they're joking back and forth. It's weird. And it's unfortunate that these side characters, who are supposed to be a much bigger inspiration when the ending comes, and we have them in the train station and they're sitting there watching the video that they just posted go viral, that is supposed to be a very inspirational ending, kind of loses its meaning or loses its impact, because these three main characters have hardly any development to them, which is strange because it's 2 hours and 10 minutes long, and there's plenty of time, I feel, in this second act where they could actually be doing things that actually have some kind of meaning or develop their characters and give them some kind of arc. I don't think any of them have much of an arc outside of Casey's character.
No, you're 100% right. And that's exactly why when they're sitting there at the end and there's just like, they're all like best friends now, and they're really excited about this thing. I don't buy any of that, nor do I honestly care, because Shyamalan completely forgot to do anything with these characters. These characters needed to come together like probably towards the end of the first act, and then instead of spending so much dang time doing almost nothing in the hospital, they should have also cut back to these characters. And these characters needed to be not independent of each other. They needed to be connecting with each other. And I mean, we get flashes of David's son learning Kevin's dad's secret. And then we get Mr. Glass learning that secret, which I liked that suspense. But then when you learn he was on the train with them, and I'm like, oh, that's it. Don't get me wrong, I do like how it ties them together. It's just not as packs a wallop as I expected it to.
Right.
But there's just always this like serendipitous convergence of these three characters at the hospital right when they need to be, right when the climax is going to happen.
Right.
They're all going to come in and testify on behalf of their person who is being imprisoned. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm just really shocked that we really don't spend that much time with these characters, particularly during the second act. Yeah.
And this is going to sound kind of strange, but a lot of this movie honestly feels like Lady in the Water, like a Lady in the Water repeat to me, because we have a lot of these, like mostly with the film critic character from Lady in the Water, where his character kind of goes out where he's just like, oh, that's right, I forgot in the movie this always happens, but not when this happens, which means I'm dead, which means I'm actually dead, but I'm actually dead, and he dies. It feels like that, but like almost, especially towards the climax, like that for like the whole movie, because there really isn't a lot of subtlety to this movie. Shyamalan doesn't really do much to mask what the message actually is. He does a pretty good job with that in both Split and in Unbreakable, where it's not so in your face about it. It does a pretty good job at like leading back and letting the story present that in a way that makes it a bit more organic. This story, however, is much different than that. I don't think that this movie is very subtle at all. And it essentially just tells you the message at the very end where everyone's a superhero kind of a thing. It's so in your face and feels so Lady in the Water like in my mind that it once again begins to lose some of its impact when I don't have the chance to just kind of sit back and like sink my teeth into it and pull out things that I'm noticing that aren't so in my face.
Alan, what is your rating and recommendation for Glass?
I was wondering what Glass would be like before walking in and watching this movie, because I had only heard one thing about it, and what I heard was not good. I heard that some of it was on the level of so bad that it's good, mostly with the dialogue. So when I walked into it, I was like, okay, well, we'll see how it goes. Split was pretty good. Unbreakable was pretty good. I'm excited to see what Shyamalan can do now that it seems that he's returned with Split. I don't know if that's the case anymore. I don't know if we ever have the return of Shyamalan like what we had with Split or what we had with even The Visit, because what I'm seeing here is it's an interesting story with characters that are very well developed and could work very well in a story like this, but its execution is extremely weak. I think that's unfortunate, which is weird for me to say, and maybe it's because Split was written, most of it was written back when Unbreakable was written. So there could be that the Shyamalan that we thought that had come out of this pit might not be the same Shyamalan as before. I don't know. That might be an answer for future movies. So at the end of the day, no, I think Glass is unfortunately a very poor movie from Mr. Shyamalan. Now, it's not as bad as the two that we consider The Valley, Last Airbender and After Earth, but
and The Happening.
The Happening, yes. But at the same time, when I said it feels a lot like Lady in the Water to me, I think that my score and my thoughts on it are floating more towards that than what I feel like this movie should have ever gone towards. So my score, 4 out of 10 is not going to be recommended for me. I don't see me ever watching this movie again. I wouldn't. Music's good, but outside of that, I don't see anything of me dragging me back to watch it again.
Glass is mostly good, but definitely an underwhelming conclusion to the Unbreakable trilogy. I like the way Shyamalan brings his leads together, but none of them do anything of true impact to make the stakes worthwhile. There's not much else to say about this movie, except that it's a decent, albeit soft conclusion that seems to bring up the possibility of a fourth film without any firm finality. For me, Glass received 6 stars out of 10 with a weak recommend. Originally, I gave it a 7 when I saw it in September because I thought it wasn't too bad. I didn't think it was great either, but now that I've been able to rewatch it and process it more, I will recommend it on the basis of watching it together as a trilogy. I think you can have a decent enough time doing that. But yeah, after seeing this film twice, there's really no reason for me to come back to it. But still, I don't think it's that bad of a movie. I just don't think it's that good in any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. So
it's competent.
Yes. Yeah. And for me, I think the problem that I have with it is it's just very unimpactful and very underdeveloped. And that's what causes me to pull away from it is I don't really care about any of these characters. Whereas in the past 2 movies that have been leading up to this, I've cared a lot about its main characters and what it's trying to say with that. I think Shyamalan does a very good job at building well-rounded characters out of a very dark place. But when it comes to this movie, it feels like there is very little progress being made off of what has already been built. So it feels almost like a waste of time to me than anything else. I don't know it had this movie been done better, then maybe I feel like this would have been a worthy conclusion to these characters. But I don't think that what we get here is necessarily as fulfilling as what I was expecting.
Yeah, and like in some ways, I like that we're struggling as well with the characters with the fact that maybe none of them are superheroes, or supervillains. They don't really have any extraordinary powers, but that doesn't necessarily make for a very exciting or gripping movie necessarily, and neither is there much drama to it. Like I said, Unbreakable's a drama, Split is a thriller, this has elements of action, some thriller elements. Shyamalan describes it as within the superhero genre, but it's also still a thriller. I'm not sure this movie really knows what it wants to be because it's trying to bring the genres from its separate films and kind of mash it all together and then smooth it out with a rolling pin in order to give a presentable picture.
Right.
But unfortunately, it just really doesn't come out that well. That being said, this is, as far as Shyamalan goes, I'll give you my rankings of all of his movies here in just a second, but this one hits about the middle of the road for me, actually. So he's done a lot worse than this.
Yeah, for me, in reality, it is pretty close to the middle. I don't know how close, but relatively close to the middle because there are a lot of not good Shyamalan movies that we've talked about. But it isn't as bad as The Happening, After Earth, Last Airbender. For me, it's pretty close to maybe Lady in the Water, like in terms of what I think in terms of what my feelings are toward it.
I find it to be better than The Visit.
I don't think.
Not by much, though.
So in terms of it being better than The Visit, I think The Visit is better than this. But yeah, like you said, probably not by a lot, but by enough that I would say that it is, for me, easily The Visit is better than this one.
I think The Visit has a better story in terms of the twists, and some of the characters are a bit more interesting, and it's definitely a little more frightening and gripping.
Right.
But once again, I think they suffer from a similar syndrome where the second act becomes such a dip that I've lost all interest by the time the third act rolls around. Even though The Visit might have a better third act, but to me it doesn't. The Visit feels a little more cliche in terms of that. It doesn't feel as original.
Right.
But regardless, here is my list from number 1 to number 14. Number 1 being my favorite, number 14 being my least favorite. Split, The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, The Village, Signs. I threw in Stuart Little because I did review it and Shyamalan wrote it. Glass, The Visit, After Earth, The Last Airbender, Praying with Anger, Lady in the Water, Wide Awake, and The Happening.
And here's my list. Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, Signs, Split, The Village, The Visit, Glass, Lady in the Water, After Earth, The Last Airbender, Wide Awake, Praying with Anger, and The Happening. And those last few, especially from Lady in the Water on, were kind of hard to figure out where exactly they landed on my list. It's kind of hard to say which ones are worse than the others in my mind. So the question becomes, is there actually going to be a fourth movie to, I guess, the Unbreakable trilogy? No, there won't be. I looked it up. Shyamalan himself is not really looking to expand the universe. He said he's not really even looking to make a cinematic universe at all. So he said that there will be no sequels in the future for this kind of a movie. And yeah, no cinematic universe in his mind that he's going to try and go for this franchise.
Gotcha. Well, I can see why he wants to move on to different projects. And in his mind, This is a wrap up. In my mind, it's just not in some ways it's satisfying. In other ways, I think he tried too hard at the end. And he sprinted too much exertion at the finish line and tripped there. He stumbled.
Right.
But this is not, even though this is the end as of right now of our Shyamalan retrospective, this is not the end in finality, because we will be coming back. Shyamalan isn't done. His newest project is actually coming out this year. So Shyamalan has 2 projects coming out in the same year, which is a first for him, except this one is a TV show. His new Apple Plus show called Servant. It did come out 2 weeks ago on Thanksgiving Day, and Judging by the trailer, it looks incredible. I have not got to watch the TV show yet. I'm not an Apple Plus subscriber, but it looks very, very twisted and horrifying and very intriguing. So I'm actually excited to watch that eventually.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what that one's all about. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to watch it inside Apple TV Plus, but from the looks of things, a lot of the things that have been made in-house with Apple have been looking pretty good. I haven't heard too much about really any of the shows that have come out of it or what people have been thinking about them, but from what I've been seeing, they do look relatively good in quality. So I wonder what Servant's going to be like. I haven't really seen anything on it other than I know that he's going to be directing a lot of the episodes. So I'll be curious to see how that ends up, what the verdict is when it finally releases and all of it's out.
Judging by the trailers, it looks like it'll be more of an interesting story than what we got here with Glass. But his next directorial film is titled Labor of Love. That has been more recently announced. From the description I saw, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything like too supernatural or foreboding. That could change, of course. We just have a preliminary plot statement. Otherwise, he has 2 upcoming projects that are called 11 Little Indians, Reincarnate, and 2 untitled projects for Universal. One will come out in 2021 and the other in 2023. So as of right now, looks like we're going to be keeping on this Shyamalan retrospective at least another 4 years into the future, 3 years.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, maybe he'll get back onto the every 2 year cycle. I guess we'll see what happens in the next coming years if that will remain the same. If he keeps putting out a movie every 2 years, we'll be back every 2 years, I guess, to talk about the new Shyamalan.
Yeah, I'm very interested as well because some of this looks like he may be moving away from the more so horror or thriller genre. I could be completely wrong with that because clearly Servant is well fitted within that genre, those genres. But his movies, he may be wanting to do something different, which he's done plenty of different things. He's not just stuck with the horror genre, but as of late, that's the genre that's propelled him back into everyone's good graces.
Right.
As of right now, I don't know, but I'm glad we didn't end this movie review series on a really sour note. I know we're both not too happy with the way that Glass ended, but at least it's not like the lows of The Happening or The Airbender or After Earth.
I'm glad that it's not ending on like one of those movies. This would be a very unfortunate retrospective.
But he has the chance to change that as well with his upcoming films. He's got quite a few of them on his docket, so I'll be interested to see those and definitely come back excited to review those with Alan. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible retrospective series that has taken us across the entire year. We've reviewed all of Shyamalan's 13 films that he has directed. It's been really cool to finally say that we've seen them all. We've really given them inspective review for all of those. And it's neat to see the highs and lows of Shyamalan finally and know what that's all about. But listeners, we want to hear from you. So the question after the show is Glass a satisfying conclusion to the end of the Unbreakable trilogy? I know that 69% of you on Rotten Tomatoes did enjoy this film. And we're just curious to see what you think, because we did enjoy elements, but once again, there was some disappointment to it as well. So it's fairly mixed, I would say. Alan, thanks for joining me.
Sure thing.
So next week, we won't have our usual Monday release. That's because we will be releasing the Christmas special on Christmas Day, and it's going to be National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. That is such a hilarious film. It'll be a blast to review a movie that a lot of people really love to watch around Christmas time. And then after that, we will be debuting our Filmmaker Special. Some of those details are still under wraps for now, so you'll have that to look forward to at the very beginning of 2020. But we will see you next week, listeners, with National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Hey listeners, it's Corbin. Don't forget to check out the exciting links in the description below that will connect you with more great movie reviews for your listening pleasure, and our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter page, and of course our official website where you can read great articles and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Also, if you want exclusive bonus content such as extra movie reviews, movie commentaries, and our thoughts on the latest movie news and trailers, plus more, then check out our Patreon page. It's a great way to help keep this show free, and it gives you great content that's yours to keep. All of that and more is found in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe whether you're on YouTube, Apple, Google, or Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. And while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review so other movie lovers can more easily find our podcast. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. So don't forget to share with your friends and family, and we'll see you next week, listeners. The Silver Screen Guide podcast is edited and produced by Allen and Corbin. Intro and outro music is created by Thomas Rankin. The thoughts and opinions herein expressed are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent those held by Silver Screen Guide. Silver Screen Guide is not affiliated with any company or individual involved with the creation of this movie or TV show. No portion of the podcast may be used without express written permission from Silver Screen Guide.
Yeah, I don't think for me that's necessarily the case. I think The Visit is better than this movie. And that's mostly because that movie looks good and sounds really good. It's got a good score and it's got Roger Deakins as a cinematographer, so of course it looks great. That's one of the things that I think really puts it above Glass for me, is just by its cinematic quality alone.
Yes, we could always change this later, but Roger Deakins didn't do The Visit.
He didn't?
No, it's Marcy Alberti.
Wait, what? Did I say The Visit? Oh, yeah. I meant to say The Village.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Okay, I thought I heard you say The Village, so I was like, oh, yeah, it's... okay.
Wide Awake and The Happening.
I'll have to record this because I didn't write down a list for me.
Letterboxd.
I totally forgot until you were talking about it, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't do that."
I've been keeping a list this whole time on Letterboxd, so that's
gotcha.
Why.
Okay, I'll re-record. I'll record this after the podcast, and then I'll just add it in later.
Sure.